forgiveness equals freedom. And even more importantly, self-forgiveness is the ultimate act of self-compassion. If you don't self-forgive, if you don't practice self-forgiveness, you wake up every morning, you're putting on a backpack full of rocks, pebbles, stones, boulders, and all that dead weight. And that's how you go around life.
Did you know that choosing happiness often is a deliberate act, a choice, and a conscious practice, rather than a blind pursuit of it? In today's episode of the Happiness Squad podcast, we're joined by Dr. Elia Gourgouris, also known as America's Happiness Doctor. Dr. Elia is the best-selling author of 2 books, 7 Paths to Lasting Happiness, and a co-author of 7 Keys to Navigating a Crisis. He's also the host of a new TV show called The Happy Hour with Dr. Elia. His life's mission is to help people become happier and more resilient, and today he shares his personal journey through loss, burnout, and then finding true happiness. In this insightful conversation, we delve into the 7 paths that Elia discovered for lasting happiness, including the importance of self-love, gratitude, forgiveness, and living in alignment with your purpose. Dr. Elia also talks about the critical role of self-care and recognizing the signs of burnout before it's too late. Together, we discuss the spiritual aspect of happiness, how unplugging from the constant flow of information is critical to feed the spirit, and how acts of kindness can transform not just your life, but the lives of those around you. Wait till the end when Dr. Elia shares a powerful daily practice that he learned from his grandfather, a simple yet profound act of kindness that can make you the richest person in the world. This episode was packed with wisdom and actionable steps to help you choose your happiness today. Hi, my dear friend. It is so lovely to have you with us on this Happiness Squad podcast. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, Elia, you are known as America's Happiness Doctor. So I want to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got that name, and really, what are the experiences in your life that really got you to the point where, you've dedicated your life towards helping people be happier and more resilient.
Ashish, it's a pleasure to be on your show. Thanks for having me, first of all. So, I was born a long time ago in Athens, Greece. And my family moved to Santa Monica in Southern California when I was 10 years old. And I think the biggest reason for that, there were multiple reasons, but the biggest one is that my mom, who is the most amazing human I have ever met to this day, my mom was not loved by men and women. She was beloved because she was pure love, unconditional love and acceptance, and made everybody feel that way. Unfortunately, she got cancer, and back in the day, cancer back then was a death sentence in Greece. I mean, she had a radical mastectomy, and so anyway, my parents had actually lived in Los Angeles prior to that, so decided to emigrate again, and that really prolonged her life. For my brother and I, it was a huge benefit because we got to have her during our teenage years. Unfortunately, eventually she succumbed just as I had graduated from UCLA, and my brother had gotten his master's from UCLA, and she was too actually sick to come to our graduation. So we went to the hospital to see her, dressed in cap and gown. And, she saw us, she was kind of beaming with pride and so on. And she really turned to both of us and said, "This is what I've lived for. I know you guys are going to be okay." And then that began a descent, towards and her life ended about 6 months later or so. But her passing was pivotal to my happiness. I know it's kind of strange, doesn't it? When my mom, on her deathbed, this is the last thing she ever told me. And she said, "My boy, don't worry about me. I'm going to be just fine. I just want you to be happy." And these were really her parting words to me. And, then she went into a coma and died within 24, 48 hours later. So obviously, for me, I was a mama's boy. I admit it. I was so close to my mom. I think on some level, I knew that I wouldn't have her for the rest of my life. So every moment, every day, every week, every year that I got to spend with her on this earth was a blessing. But of course, once she passed away, my dad, who was in love with my mom for 35 years, they met when they were like 16. he starts drinking even more. So I kind of lose him. Even though he was alive, he wasn't really, you know what I mean? And then my older brother kind of went off and did his own thing and his own grief, of course. So I had this beautiful family, and all of a sudden, like somebody threw a grenade, my whole life imploded, like blew up completely, like going from the as good as you can have it to nothing, like not even.
So much loss and loneliness and, and just, complete disconnection. Sure, I can imagine how hard it must have been. And how old were you then, Elia?
I was 22.
Yeah, wow.
I was 22 when she passed away. But, I didn't, back then we didn't have like grief, even not even grief counseling. There was nobody. So I went from, this huge support system to almost nothing. And for the first year after she passed away, I'm trying to make ends meet. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I really didn't want to get out of bed every morning. It was a struggle, which is very unusual for me because I'm typically a pretty happy, happy-go-lucky person. But honestly, the grief was too much. And not that I would take my life, but I was like, God, if I get hit by a bus today, I'm okay. I get to be with my mom at least. Because I couldn't think living, for the next 50, 60, 70 years without my mom on this planet. It was unthinkable to me.
Right.
So it was a struggle the first year. But something interesting happened on the 1-year anniversary. And, anniversaries are tough when we're talking about grief and loss, especially the first year. I remember her comments, which were like, don't worry about me. I just want you to be happy. And literally something snapped in my brain. It's like, almost like, we didn't know anything about neuroplasticity then, but I swear to you, it's almost like I somehow created a new neural pathway in my brain, which is like, you know what? The best way to honor my mom is to live a happy life. This is what she wanted. It's a great, so I leaned into that. And I just began my trajectory change after that. Instead of feeling sorry for myself and having all this life, I'm like, no better way to honor my mom, but to live this great life and a happy life. And that's when I decided to go back to, graduate school, get my PhD in psychology. And, the first half of my career, I was a clinical psychologist in private practice, crushing it, loving it, like full practice, people on a wait list, all word of mouth stuff, until I got burned out. And that was pivotal. And the signs of me getting burned out were all over the place. And I was a knucklehead. So I ignored them. Guess what happened when you ignore those signs?
I know. And it's an important point because I think we had, Dr. Neha Sangwan, who's a doctor who does a lot of work around burnout now. Same story, I think, and this is something that so many people don't realize, that even those who specialize in this work and should know better, when we are going through that phase, right, where we are like accumulating, the burnout is literally, it happens all of a sudden where you have a complete collapse. But along the way, you're suffering and you just somehow feel like we have this in our brain. We can get through anything, We are totally fine with our bodies. We get tired, we go to sleep, right? We feel exhausted, we rest. But somehow when it comes to doing things with our brain, like we will ourselves to do crazy things. Like I'm like barely open. I'll just have caffeine and keep going through till I hit a wall and then it's too late, right? So,
when I retired, I realized, and I found out through some research, that the typical psychologist, therapist, counselor, or whatever, if they see 20 to 25 patient hours a week, that's considered full time.
Yeah.
And the average is like 10 years before they get burned out. Well, I did it for 18 years, and I would see 45 patient hours a week, like back to back to back, no breakfast, no lunch, working like a maniac. My wife used to say, honey, you're going to have a heart attack. And I was like, very arrogant. I'm like, no, I can handle it. And I did for 16 years. Until my bodies began to break down. Ashish, when you're in physical pain, kind of like emotional or mental or spirit, at some point it brings you down to your knees. And because I'm a spiritual person, it literally brought me down to my knees one time because I'm in so much pain. And I'm like, to the source of light and God. And I'm like, why is this happening to me? I'm trying to be a good husband, father. I'm helping as many people as I can. I'm doing, and the answer came instantly, short, precise, and was this: Elia, I'm trying to take you in a different direction and you're not listening to me. End quote. That was it. Well, that was kind of cryptic. And of course, rather than paying attention to that, what did I do? I ignored it. Now, why I ignored it? For a variety of reasons. I was afraid, like, what am I going to do with my life? I'm a good provider. I'm making really good income. I really like this job. I like being the doctor. I like all that stuff. I was into it. So guess what happens when you ignore that voice? And to me, that voice is, you can call it the spirit. You can call it that still small voice. You can call it your intuition or your higher self. I don't really care what you call it. listen to it. Because in my experience in life, every time I've heard that voice and then acted on it, it has always worked out. That's an absolute. But in that particular case, I heard the voice and I ignored it. So what happens when you ignore that voice? Because your body's trying to talk to you. Does your life get better or worse, Ashish?
Way worse, very quickly.
Way worse. So now things are really getting bad. Fast forward 6 more months go by, and I'm really struggling. Now I'm in and out of the emergency room. They're doing all kinds of tests, but they can't figure out what's wrong with me. But my pain was not psychosomatic. Mine was real. So now 6 months go, now I'm really desperate because now it's impacting me on a weekly basis, multiple times a week. I'm doubled over in stomach pain. I'm like, okay, this is back again on my, okay, why is this happening to me? Same question. Now the answer gets a little bit more direct. Listen, I told you already, I'm trying to take in a different direction. You're not listening to me. And then he said, I want you to spread the light to a lot more people, which is a fascinating, answer. Like not one-on-one therapy, but broaden, just spread your input. And because I think they still could tell that I'm like iffy about it. And if you don't change your ways, I'm going to call you home, on the other side, by the time you're 50. Well, guess what? My mom died when she was 51. So 50 to me, all of a sudden that hit me. And I remember going upstairs and telling my wife, I gotta end this. Reluctantly, very much reluctantly. So, closing a big practice, is not easy for legal purpose, all kinds of things. So 9 months later, I stopped taking new referrals and I started working with whatever existing clients I had to get them to a certain point. And I was almost retired. Like I was 2 months away from retire when my body completely collapsed. And not to bore you with the gory details, but went to the hospital, a couple of surgeries, and finally, because it was so painful on every level, when I had the second surgery back to back, which wasn't expected, I had complications. I had major complications. I asked my surgeon, I said, why did this happen to me? Like, I better learn this lesson. I really need to know why this happened to me. I never want to be in this place again. He goes, oh, that's easy. Either excessive drinking or excessive stress. Well, I didn't really drink. So for 18 years and tens of thousands of hours, I was like holding inside of me all the toxicity, everything that everyone has shared with me, the most, which, because you can't share with as a psychologist, it's confidential, right? So I kept it all, and it literally started to eat me alive. So then I made a commitment. I'm like, never again. Never again. This will never happen to me again. And that was my commitment. And then I switched over to the corporate side, started doing executive coaching and leadership training and development, and started writing books and lecturing and so on.
I love it. So my friend, so true, right? And there's so much here in the story that you're saying. I think 3 things. Number one, we recognize this at our dying moments oftentimes. Your mom lived a beautiful life, but 3 things I want to echo back for our listeners, and then I want to get into your book. The first one is almost everyone in their last dying breaths just wishes that they let themselves be happy and everybody else be happy.
Yes.
Just be happy, right? This notion of choose happiness is something that, if you look at the 5 regrets of the dying, your mom's words, it's something, but sometimes we like, let's not have that regret. Let's choose happiness rather than pursue happiness. Choose versus pursue. Don't pursue it because you're going to be unhappy. And I think so that's a beautiful, what beautiful parting gift. And also what a beautiful honor that you gave to her to action that, right? So I think that's number one. I think the second big one, friends, as Elia said from his own, look, he's a clinical psychologist. He's trained in this stuff, right? He should know better about stress, mental well-being, physical well-being, helped so many people. And yet he didn't see the signs of burnout, right? There are 3 signs for burnout from a medical perspective. You are exhausted chronically.
Number 1. Yep.
Number 2, you are experiencing a higher cynicism towards your work or life. Nothing's going to change. It doesn't matter. And number 3, you are actually seeing that it takes you longer to do things. So your efficacy is going down physically, mentally, etc. Look for those signs. And if you find yourself in those, seek help, seek professional help, and seek dramatic changes in what you're doing, because you don't want to end up where Elia ended up.
No, you don't. And that's why I shared the story. I'm not proud of the story, but it's a true story. And, it's the old physician, heal thyself. I was taking care of everybody else, but I wasn't taking care of me.
Yeah. So
That's
really,
plain and
really
simple.
important. And number 3 is, don't convince yourself that if you're serving others, I'm not going to burn. A lot of people think the way to happiness is to have more meaning. No, like the way to happiness is a lot more holistic thing. And I want to get into that with Elia because he wrote about that in his book. So it's not just service. In fact, people in not-for-profits and doing work who are healing others are more burnt out and more stressed and struggle more than actually those who are actually doing it in quote unquote for-profit capitalistic world.
That is such a great point, because that was my default, but I'm helping people. I'm helping humanity. I'm helping save lives. So that was my rationalization, I guess, for not wanting to, plus I'm not a quitter. That's the other thing. So to me, it felt like I don't quit. I just don't quit. If it kills me.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, and somehow we convince ourselves, especially in the not-for-profit world. I've talked to so many people and they're like, yes, I am willing to suffer because I'm helping others. You don't need to suffer to help others, right? If you choose, that's fine. That's great. But you don't. In fact, if you are suffering, you are helping others less because you're not at your fullest potential, right?
And the funny thing is, Ashish, is that I'm not into suffering at all. I like the good life. I like having pleasurable things. I like living life to the fullest and being happy in someone. It was just, this is who I am, right? Dr. Elia, the psychologist, you help people.
There's an identity there, right? That's the identity. Right. This is who I am. This is what I do. How can I leave that?
Right. And I still had young kids at home. It's not like I had raised my kids. So I felt the responsibility to be the care, the provider for the family. There were also other concerns. I was making really good money, all that stuff. Anyway, it was a painful lesson. But here's the good news. I'm 20 years this year, actually next year. I'm 19 years older than I was back then. And I'm healthier now physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And chronologically, I'm 19 years older. Think about that. Why? Because I practice self-care, which we'll talk about it, in the 7 paths to happiness.
So let's talk about that. Let's get there. So you wrote 2 books, right? Let's get into the first one. You wrote the first book that was called 7 Paths to Lasting Happiness. So share with us, what are those 7 paths? And then let's get into it and discuss a couple of them.
Okay, so So the first and foremost is love thyself. Love yourself and practice massive self-care. Self-care is a non-negotiable. We'll come back to that. The second one is gratitude. Because you cannot be in a grateful state and be depressed simultaneously on a physiological level. Because when we are grateful, guess what happens? The drug dealer up here, my favorite, I know a lot of drug dealers, this is my favorite one, up here in the brain.
We are our biggest chemical cocktail factory right here, internally.
No question of, exactly. So again, when you're in a grateful state, chemicals get released and it lowers your cortisol and just elevates your mood and so on. Okay, so that's number 2. The third one is forgiveness. Gandhi said that forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. I will add to that forgiveness equals freedom. And even more importantly, self-forgiveness is the ultimate act of self-compassion. Although in my experience, most people have not done the self-forgiveness homework.
Yes.
So we'll come back to that. Living your purpose. Living in alignment with your purpose. And for me, I learned that early on in my life. It's unfortunate. My purpose has always been to leave this world better than I found it. To help other people. That's what fuels my passion. And I've leaned into it for 35 years. I've done that my whole life, and I love it. That's number 4. The other one is, number 5, is I believe we're spiritual beings. Like my personal, bias. I'm not talking about religion right here, but I'm talking spirituality. So feed your spirit. However you do that, through prayer, meditation, mindfulness, and so on, it's vitally important, I believe, to acknowledge and support your spiritual self. Number 6 is relationships, and, have healthy, thriving, wonderful relationships, and get rid of any toxic relationship you have in your life. So that's a big factor in a relationship. And the last but not least is kindness. It's kind of funny. We start with self-care, number 1. We end up with kindness, number 7. Honestly, Ashish, I believe that happy people by nature perform acts of kindness, and not random acts of kindness, deliberate, conscious, and mindful acts of kindness all the time, because their own batteries are full. So they're great teammates in the workplace. They collaborate with their fellow co-workers. On the flip side, we know that when we do perform acts of kindness, again, something happens to our brains. And the cocktail that she's talked about, again, gets released. So with kindness, everybody wins. The giver, the receiver, and then those who are witnessing those acts of kindness, the audience in it, because it inspired them to also move forward and do acts of kindness. So yeah, those are the 7 paths.
We hope you're enjoying this episode and would love your help in spreading awareness and furthering our mission to help 1 billion people rewire for happiness. Please consider leaving us a review and sharing this podcast with others in your personal and professional life who you feel could benefit from some of these very insights. It's a really simple way to extend and spread positivity. Also check out Rewire, our proprietary offering to move you from knowing to doing, on the Happiness Squad website, www.happiness-squad.com. Rewire uses the science of habit formation and the power of community to help you build happier habits in 5 minutes or less daily. Now, back to the episode. This is why, so friends, for those who are listening or those who are watching, Elia and I connected 2 years ago when I started my book, Hardwired for Happiness. Elia was in Europe. We literally met in person. I think it was like 2-3 weeks ago, Elia. Maybe 4 weeks now. Yes. Time flies. But literally, I have to tell you this. I met Elia and it was like we are 2 brothers from other mothers. Like we were finishing each other's sentences. We were so in sync. In fact, these 7 practices, friends, I can tell you that Elia writes about, most of them show up in our framework. They are backed by neuroscience and psychology, and they're in every wisdom tradition, right? So these are beautiful, beautiful practices. And so many, I think we all come to this. But my first invitation to you as you listen to this, we'll put them in our show notes. Just do your own assessment. How many of these do you know? But second, how many of these do you practice? And where is the gap, right? And focus on that. And I want to, for our show right now, focus on 2 which we don't talk a lot about. Elia, often it doesn't get talked. Gratitude, mindfulness, I think people talk about it, kindness. But I want to talk about 2. One, I want to talk about feed your spirit.
Yes.
Right? For the first time ever last year, it was a surprise to many people, even in the McKinsey model for well-being, holistic well-being, physical, mental, social, and spiritual.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Shows up, right? So I think this notion of oftentimes in the business world, in the engineering world, we want to be very science driven and we think spirit is all woo-woo out there. It's not. And it's more and more being recognized. So let's parse that a bit, Elia. So talk a little bit about feeding your spirit, disaggregate that for our listeners. And what do you mean by that? And what are some ways in which we can do that?
Yeah. Number one, to acknowledge, I literally believe that we are not physical beings having a spiritual experience once in a blue moon, but rather we are spiritual beings and we're having a physical experience on this earth for 30, 50, 70, 80, 100 years.
Yes.
So that is the big picture perspective, because I believe that my spirit existed prior to my coming here on this earth in this physical form, and it will exist at some point. Our bodies will come to, we'll cross the line. That's it. We're all going to cross that line. But I believe that the spirit continues on. We have to get quiet. So in a world that we're like inundated by data, social media, TV, just like constant information coming, we have to unplug and we have to get quiet. Oftentimes, when you say, "Wait, what do you do?" Being out in nature makes me feel closer to God, makes me feel closer to my higher self and to the spirit. There's something about it. The things that I do, specifically, I go for a walk every single day. That's part of my self-care, which is a non-negotiable. Prior to the pandemic, I used to walk like 3 times a week for an hour, like 3 miles an hour, whatever, because I had to, because I got gray hair and I'm getting older. But once the pandemic hit and the pressure and the stress level increased, personally, family, extended family, friends all over the world, and speaking to audiences, because the second book was about the pandemic, I realized that that's not going to cut it. Like, Elia, you got to up your game. So in April of 2020, I started to walk every single day for an hour. Now I do it because I want to, not because I have to, which is very different. And that's a non-negotiable. And 50% of the time, the adjustment that I've made is I don't take my phone with me. Because before I was always on the phone talking to clients, talking to, catching up on people while I'm walking, multitasking. I'm like, listen, park your phone. And what I call it my gratitude walk. I walk, I look at the blue skies. You and I lived near Boulder, Colorado, beautiful place to live. The trees, the fresh air, the blue skies, the birds serenading me every morning as I walk by. I hear the birds, and I'm in a state of gratitude for a full hour. And I talk to myself. I kind of meditate as I'm walking. Kind of weird. My mind can't get too quiet. I don't meditate like my wife does an hour at home. I do it when I walk, and I talk to God. I talk to my higher self, and I express gratitude for everything that I have, including my challenges. And people have said, you kind of live like this charmed life where you're so lucky. Like, you're 8 months here, you 4 months, you're in your home in Greece and, Europe and so on. It maybe like has something to do with it, but I've sat down and I've consciously and deliberately thought about how do I want to live the rest of my life until I die, which is the following. I want to be with people that I love and love me and spend quality time with, people like that, eat the good food, travel, see the world, and make a difference on a larger scale, which is one of the reasons why the TV show that we just started, the Happy Hour with Dr. Elia. Ashish, you are my second guest ever for season 1. So excited to have you on the show. I also want to work only with people that I enjoy working with.
Yeah.
And I'd love to collaborate with you, my friend, because I feel like we're so in sync in so many ways, and we could do so much good together. So that's another story we can talk about later. But that's how I feed my spirit. And then I read things that lift me up. Like every morning I'll have, a couple of sayings that come out to me, and then I ponder that throughout the day. Like, okay, so how can I implement that? Because what you said earlier, in life, it doesn't matter what we know. What matters is what we do with what we know.
Yes.
You said it.
Yeah, it's beautiful, right? Walking in nature, allowing ourselves to be silent. And 2 types of silent. Silence out there, but also silence in here, right? Allowing our thoughts to settle so we can truly hear. Friends, the universe, our inner soul, is always whispering. But if we are too busy talking, we won't listen. We won't hear the words. And Elia, I'm with you every morning, my friend. I sit outside. We have this beautiful, we'll have you over. We have this beautiful tree. We have bird feeder every morning. One of the best things for me is I sit outside, have my cup of tea. I always will pick up one of the spiritual books that I have, right? It can be a philosophical book. It can be Stoicism, Buddhism, Yoga Sutra, sometimes the Bible. And I'll just pick a page or 2 and I'll just read it. And literally, it's my moment to start my day. And usually that's before I've picked up my phone, let anything happening out there. So starting your day with some words of wisdom that we can have front of mind. Like, I love that. I think you mentioned the same. It's really, really important. We have to be silent. Nature is so healing. Nature is so therapeutic. It allows literally for us to slow down because the pace of nature is slow. Our pace is, I think we are the fastest pace of any living thing out there because we never stop, right?
I want to say something to you and your audience. So I had Ashish on my TV show a few days ago, and one of the things she talked about was what happens when we first wake up. First thing, like 85, 90% of people do what when we first wake up? You told me this.
We pick up our phone. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, guilty. I'm part of that 85%, 90%. So I made a commitment to myself, to Ashish, and to my audience, and I'm doing to you. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this for the next week, just to try something. Don't get on your phone as soon as you wake up. Now, this is a habit I've had for 20 years, you guys. It's not an easy habit to break. But I have to tell you, Ashish, for this entire week, first thing I do when I wake up is think of you. And I think about what you said. No, I'm serious. And because of what you told me, I have not, at least for 4 days now.
Amazing.
I have woken up. I have thought throughout my day. My phone is turned off completely. I have expressed gratitude for the upcoming, whatever I have to do that I want to do or I am doing today. And about 15, 20 minutes after I wake up, that's when I turn on my phone. Can I tell you, and I'm, obviously having your TV show is kind of crazy. There's a lot of stress and so on. I have had 3 or 4 wonderful days as a result of that. And it's changing one habit, micro habit in some way. We're just like about 15 minutes delay of getting to my phone as soon as I wake up. And Ashish, I can't thank you enough, man, for that. Because my commitment to you was for a week. I'm going to, no, this is how I'm going to be the rest of my life. Not just for the week.
Well, my friend, I'm so happy. I'm so happy to hear that.
No, thank you, though. Seriously, I thank you. Because I wouldn't have, until you pointed it out the way that you did. I mean, I kind of knew it in the back of my head, but I wasn't doing it. So you calling it out was very helpful to me. And my commitment is I'm going to do this the rest of my life now. I'm creating a new habit. It's only 4 days, old so far, but I'll get there. I promise you.
Well, I love that. And friends, this mindful start, right? Life about happiness is as much about what we remove from it as we add. One of the things you talked about in removing was toxic relationships.
Yes.
If there's something that's not serving and draining you, it's okay to let it go, right? It's okay to let it go. So talk to me. The second one I want to talk about is literally the topic of forgiveness. And look, forgiveness for others, but I really want you to talk a little bit, Elia, about forgiveness for self, because you said it's about both. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, self-forgiveness, Ashish, to me, is the ultimate act of self-compassion. So when I was in private practice, my dissertation was on Alcoholics Anonymous, so I did a lot of work with addicts. And when they come to you, they're like rock bottom. Like they've, their self-defeating thoughts have led to self-destructive behaviors that have impacted their lives professionally and personally, so on. So, typically they come in, hey, hi, my name is John and I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a drug addict or whatever. And in the first session, I would say, hold up, well, that's not true. They're like, well, I don't think you understand addictions or alcoholism. I'm like, I don't think you understand human life. It's human nature. You're so much more than that, John. You're a father, you're a husband, you're a friend, you're a son, you're a cousin, you're a nephew, you have your professional life. So yes, your addiction has been destructive and it's impacted you in a negative way and so on, and we'll deal with that. But I just want you to remember that you're so much more than that, number one. So then, the year goes by, they sober up, they're sober for a year, we celebrate the first birthday, I guess, of sobriety and so on. And typically at that point, I would have maybe the last interview, if you will. I would say, so John, do you feel like your significant other, your spouse has forgiven you? Yes. Your kids? Yes. Your boss? Yes. Whatever. You're going to go down the list. Then I would ask the obvious question. What about you? Have you forgiven yourself? Now, she's the best answer that I received, and I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of people, not the most common answer, but the best was, I'm working on it. The most common answer was no. And I'm like, okay, well, we're not quite done yet. So then I'm like, a lot of people just don't know how to self-forgive. They don't know the process which is actually a very simple process, to be honest with you. So I would bring, let's say, John back. I'm like, John, I want you to write down in bullet points all the things you haven't forgiven yourself for the entire life. It could be 5 items, it could be 50 items. I don't really care how many items. Like, go back, take your time, spend a day or two. Once you're done, I want you to put a number next to each one of those statements on a scale of 1 through 10. 10 would be you actually killed somebody. Like you literally murdered another human. That's a 10. Because a lot of people, we exaggerate about things we don't forgive ourselves with. A 1 would be, well, I went out to dinner with my wife and some friends last night, and I spilled some red wine on my white shirt, and I was kind of embarrassed. Okay, that's a 1. And then we begin the process. And typically we start with the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s to gain some practice, to gain some momentum, and then we move on to the most difficult things to forgive. What I discovered in working with senior leaders, especially C-suite, when I did this with them, especially alpha males, and I remember the first time that I had one guy, very successful, multimillionaire. His life was a mess, though, and he had all kinds of things. So when I presented this scenario to him, this is your homework, he goes, that's not how I want to do it. And I'm like, what? He goes, I'm going to start with my 9s and my 8s, and because if I can do those, then all the rest of them. Of course, right? Of course. Ashish knows because he's worked with so many leaders. I mean, like,
yeah. So I don't do the easy stuff, right? I chew glass. Like, why would I start with candy, right? Like, no, like I've worked with those types. I've seen those types. Yeah.
But honestly, to your audience, I really don't care which way you go as long as you do the homework. It doesn't matter to me. To me, it makes sense to start with this easier stuff because they're easier to do, right? But the end result is this. When we were done with the list, and we usually would take a lighter and we burn the paper and we release the fumes up to the heavens. When I hugged them on the way out the door, you know what they would whisper to me? I'm like, I feel like 1,000 pounds has been lifted off of me.
Yes.
And my only regret is that I didn't do this years ago. Because some people have things on their self-forgiveness list, Ashish, that go back decades, and they've held on to this dead weight. If you don't self-forgive, if you don't practice self-forgiveness, you wake up every morning, and never mind not looking at your phone. You're putting on a backpack full of rocks, pebbles, stones, boulders, symbolically speaking, and all that dead weight. And that's how you go around life. Well, today's the day to forgive yourself once and for all. My wife knows this about me because self-forgiveness comes really easy to me. She goes, how do you do that? I'm like, because I don't take myself seriously. That's how I do it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And friends, I invite you to make that list today. Write a list of things that you haven't forgiven yourself for. Rank them from 1 to 10, 10 being the most extreme, right? As Elia said, which you might have killed somebody or done lots of damage. And 1 is, just something that something silly, something easier. Rank it. And as he said, I actually do agree. I think this is a new thing. We're not used to it. It's better to start from the bottom, but go knock yourself out if you want to start from the top. But here's the thing, friends. I think the reason this is really, really also important is 2 really relevant things. Number 1, we often don't talk about it because we are ashamed of it, right? So those things that we achieve out there, we're proud of, we share with everyone. Those things that bring us shame and guilt, we keep within. And oftentimes we put deep into our unconscious because we don't want to think about it, right? It makes us feel smaller. So it's important by naming it, you're starting the process of healing because you're putting it, what you make an object, you can actually do something with.
And you can do that with a professional, be a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist, or it could be with your best friend, a trusted advisor, your best friend, somebody that you feel comfortable with to open up. Because a lot of times those things, I've had some people say, Dr. Elia, I've shared things with you that nobody in this world knows about. I never thought I would share them out loud. I thought I was going to take those things to the grave.
Exactly. But imagine, I'm thinking, Elia, even if they said it to themselves, take a recorder, say it to yourself. If you don't want to say it to somebody else, say it to yourself. But I think this is important. If you're doing it by yourself, here's something that I might invite you to add to what Elia just said. If you're watching, you can watch it. Otherwise, I'll explain. Take your hands, put it around your arms, and literally close your eyes and give yourself a hug. You might even rub your arms 3 or 4 times. And just notice what that does. Because in those moments of our extreme darkness, we need love. And you have been that friend to others who have been in this darkness. And yes, it's wonderful if you have others who can do this for you, or you can have a therapist, you can have somebody who you can be a witness. But if not, don't make that be the reason to not do it.
Oh, absolutely. You're totally right about it. Because I can see some people say, well, I can't afford this or I can't do that. No, you don't necessarily need to have somebody else. Ashish is totally right. Do it anyway.
Do it anyways. You are your best friends. Give yourself a witness and just notice what happens for you if you just hold yourself in that place, right? And I loved your last step, which is burn it. So we are also allowing it to kind of leave. It's an act.
Yes.
So Elia, last 5 minutes, my friend. You shared some of your practices that you do around, filling your spirit. We talked a little bit about forgiveness. What are some other personal practices that you do, and then you invite leaders to kind of really integrate, in this life, in this world right now where there is so much stress, there is so much anxiety? What are some 2 or 3 things that they should do?
The one thing that I can tell you has to do with the last path, which has to do with kindness. When I was 5 years old, the first lesson that I've ever learned in life goes back to when I was 5 years old. My grandfather, whose name I carry and I honor, gave me the gift of a lifetime. And by the way, he died when I was 6, so I don't really have a lot of memories of him. I know he was a gentleman. I remember him wearing a hat and I was sitting on his lap. So when I was 5 years old, he did something that was so profound in retrospect. He said, my boy, can I tell you a secret? My ears got like this big. So he says, do you want to know a secret? And I'm looking up, yes, Grandpa. He goes, do you want to be the richest man in the world? Yes, Grandpa. I'm like, that's something. He goes, all you have to do is do something good for somebody else every day, and you, my boy, will be the richest man in the world, end quote. So somehow, in my 5-year-old, Greek brain, this was in Greek, obviously, he said this to me. I'm like, okay, so do something good for somebody else every day, and you'll be a rich man. Okay, at the time, I thought richness meant like Pirates of the Caribbean, gold and silver, and jewels and all that stuff. Obviously, that's not what he meant. But that download, it connected to my soul, and I've gone throughout my entire life for half a century now, as an adult, do something good for somebody else every day. So anytime I'm feeling a little down on myself, poor me, whatever, which is human nature, it happens. It doesn't happen very often with me, but it happens from time to time. The antidote to that is to look around and go and help somebody else. Because when you come back from that act of service, which is deliberate and conscious, your whole perspective has changed. You feel better because you have, and so that is something that I try to do every single day. Kindness is free. Kindness costs nothing other than your willingness to give somebody a hug, your willingness to smile, your willingness to compliment without wanting anything in return, by the way. You just do it because it's the right thing to do. My wife says, how do you love so many people so much, so big? I'm like, first of all, I think I've inherited that from my mom. Like, I think I channel like her love and energy and so on. And it's effortless. You know why? Because I wanted to do it. Nobody's making me do this. It's not out of guilt. It's not out of shame. It's because it's the right thing to do, and it makes me feel better. So combine that with the attitude walk, the gratitude walk, the gratitude walk, and doing something else for somebody every single day is a game changer. Add to that the self-care, which is important, right? And when you talk about senior leaders, I think their self-care is missing in action, unfortunately. I don't care how much money they have, what position they hold in an organization, they take shortcuts with their self-care, which adds to their stress level. The senior leaders are lonely in a lot of ways within the organization. I mean, they hire us as executive coaches to come in and help them just so they can have a friend that they have to pay for in a lot of ways. So, right?
I love that. No, absolutely. There is so much loneliness and pain and trauma that often gets passed on. Elia, my friend, we'll have you back and we can discuss the second book and, the lessons that you had in there. But thank you for being with us. We will definitely collaborate and create an offering for our listeners together that we can dance together. I'm grateful to you.
I'm grateful to you too. And again, thank you for telling me about the don't pick up your phone when you first wake up. I've done it for 4 days now, and it's already changing my life as we speak. So I'm deeply grateful to you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
That wraps up another episode of the Happiness Squad podcast. We hope you found the insights actionable to enhance your journey towards happiness and fill your life with more joy, health, love, and meaning. Please consider leaving us a review and share the podcast with anyone in your professional or personal life who you feel will benefit from some of these very insights. It's a really simple way to extend support and spread positivity. Take care, and remember, happiness is a choice that's available to you moment to moment in the here and now. Take care and see you next week.